Right, Shalom. First, I'd like to give all praises unto YAHAWAH, SHAM, YAHAWASHI, and double honors unto the apostles at Great Millstone, and honors to you brothers out there on the highways and the byways teaching this word in all sincerity and in truth. This is just going to be a continuation of who is an Edomite, and now we're going to go into so-called white people, okay? Because if you listen to the Hebrew Israelites, okay, you hear us mention so-called white people and white people a lot, and we use that term because it's a term that the average person will understand. When we say so-called white people, what we really are referring to are the Edomites, the children of Esau, okay? And why do we use the term so-called white? Because that is the archetype of an Edomite. Okay, the general characteristic of an Edomite, racial characteristic of an Edomite, is to look like a so-called white man. Okay, that's just the general characteristic, the archetype. Okay, and we're gonna go into it further. Okay, now what is an archetype? Let's go into the etymology. The archetype is an original pattern from which copies are made. 1540s, blah blah blah, from the Latin archetypum, from the Greek archetypon, pattern, model, figure on a seal. New or of adjective archetypos, first molded, from arche, meaning first, typos, meaning model, type, blow, mark of a blow. Okay. So, the first Edomite was a so-called white man, and his children bear that archetype even unto this very day. The majority of his children unto this very day on this planet Earth have the archetype of their father, which is why we refer to so-called white people as Edomites, because generally the majority of so-called white people are Edomites. That's why they exhibit the archetype of their forefather, and not only that, they got the spirit of their forefather and are fulfilling the prophecies of the things that their nation as a people was prophesied to do. So you got to put all these things into perspective. Alright, so when you hear us talk about so-called white people, we're talking about Edomites, because the archetype of an Edomite, okay, is to look like a so-called white man. Just like the archetype of being from the tribe of Judah is to look like a so-called Negro. Now, does that mean everyone that looks like a so-called Negro is a Judite? No. Does that mean everyone that looks like a so-called white man or looks like an Edomite is an Edomite? No. But we're going to get into that. What we're focusing on now is, why do we say so-called white people? Well, let's go back to the forefather Edom. Here we have the definitions of Edom from the Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary and the ATS Bible Dictionary, which give an accurate description according to the scriptures, because the Hebrew word for Edom is Adawam, which means red. Okay, now if you check it out, we're going to read it. Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary says red, earthy, of blood, because so-called white people, they're really not white. That's why we say so-called. They're really a people who resonate the pigmentation of red. They go from a pale yet whitish color, and that's mainly when the blood the vessels basically are not expanded on their skin surface. So what you see is the whitish, yellowish, fatty layer that's underneath the skin, to a full-blown blush red, and that happens when they have their blood comes to the surface of their body. Now you would hardly see that in a person of color because they have pigment. So people of color, they have the pigmentation of browns, whereas the so-called white people, they have the pigmentation, well, lack of pigmentation, so their color is that of reds. Their color is determined by how much blood is flowing through their skin. Now, ATS Bible Dictionary says red, a name of Esau, which the name Esau or Ashashua means wasted away is he in the Hebrew, because they are wasted away. They have a lack of pigmentation, and ultimately they're going to be wasted away. They're going to be done away from the planet completely. Now, Isaac's eldest son, appropriate on account of his natural complexion. Because what was the natural complexion of Esau? They're telling you they know. His complexion was red, or so-called white. Okay? Red people, rednecks. Alright? Whereas everyone else on the planet Earth were people of color. Now it says, but given it would seem from the current name of food for which he sold his birthright, that same red. And that's Genesis 25:25-30. And it says, see Esau and Idumea. So we're going to go into the account of the birth of Jacob and Esau. And basically the beginnings of the so-called white people, as a nation, of Edomites, the red man. Right, so this is Genesis 25, starting from verse 23. Now this is speaking of Rebecca, which she was a so-called black woman. She was a woman of color. And Isaac, the father, was a man of color. In fact, all the people on the earth in those days were people of color. Alright? Because Noah was a man of color. And common sense tells you that. Because to be a leper, to be so-called white is fucking, that's, what's it called? The term just totally, it's, recessive. So we know that we didn't come from a light-skinned people. People at first had to have been dark and then vary it to various colors of brown, because to be darker is dominant. Alright? So there's no way that Noah was a light-skinned man and then from him came all kind of super dark people. No, he had to be a dark-skinned man, and from him came all different shades of brown, including super dark. Okay? But from dark people also came lepers, which we're going to show you that. So Genesis 25:23, and the Lord said unto her, this was speaking to Rebecca, 2 nations are in thy womb. Alright, so those 2 boys, men, seeds that were in her womb were actually going to be 2 different seeds. They were going to grow up and become 2 different nations. And 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. So those 2 boys that were going to come out from the womb were going to be completely different in each other. They were going to have 2 different spirits, man. Okay? 2 different, completely different vibrations. One was going to be good, and one was going to be set to evil. Automatic evil. Right? And we don't have to tell you who that people is. And the one people shall be stronger than the other. So the Lord set it up where spiritually and physically, the one was going to be stronger than the other. And the elder shall serve the younger. So the elder one was destined to be a servant unto the younger. And it says, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, they were twins in her womb. So twins meaning two different boys were in her womb. Okay, and guess what? They were not identical. They were unidentical twins. Basically, they were formed from 2 different seeds out of Isaac. The Lord separated 2 seeds out of Isaac, man. Because the Lord can do that. Because he's the one that separated the seeds from the son of Adam. So one of the seeds Isaac produced was going to be an Edomite, and one of them was going to be like him, a son of God, an Israelite. Alright? And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, they were twins in her womb, and the first came out red, all over like an hairy garment. So the color of the child was light-skinned, like the garments they would dye red in the ancient times. And they called his name Esau, meaning Ishashwa. When they saw him, they said Ishashwa, because this guy was wasted away. He was pale as hell. Okay, he didn't have no pigment, man. And after that came out his brother, And his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare him. See, but Jacob came out normal, like everyone else on the planet Earth. He came out normal. He came out of color. He had pigment, but Esau came out red all over like a hairy garment, wasted away. All right, and that was a curse of leprosy that was placed upon him. All right, and I'm going to show you an example of that.
And we'll take this bag in.
So as you see there, you had a newborn person of color, and you see that they had the brown pigmentation, light brown, which as they grow and they enter into, they expose to sunlight, that level of brown is going to increase. But then you had the so-called white child was born pigmentless, completely red as hell, and he's going to stay like that. Okay, and by the way, that's the curse of leprosy. And you can see my video which I did on leprosy. Okay, and that's how Esau came out. And that was a mark that was put on him. And guess what? That mark was put on his children. We're going to get Genesis 36:1. It says, now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives to the daughter of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Okay, so these are all Canaanites. Dark, super black, so-called Africans. The Bashamath, Ishmael's daughter, again, the Arabs were people of color. Okay, them super light-skinned Arabs you see today, they're a mixture of basically so-called white people intermingling with Ishmael and lightening them up. Okay, sister of Nabajoth, and Adah bare to Esau Eliphaz, and Bashamath bare Ruel, and Aholibamah bare Jehush and Jalam and Korah. These are the sons of Esau which were born unto him in the land of Canaan. Right? So you gotta ask yourself, first of all, being a so-called white man, like that little bastard child you saw there that was being born, okay, how the hell have you got all these so-called white people on the earth today? Millions upon millions of so-called white people on earth today. They would have had to have started from an instance of a so-called white person being born, right? So that means that everyone else that was on the planet with him were people of color. So how did they manage to become in such great numbers and still be white? Because here we have Esau. He's dealing with dark skinned women. Guess why? Because the way he looked was actually a curse upon him, and the Lord kept that curse upon him to be a mark and an archetype unto his people. It's actually the mark of Cain, because Esau is Cain in the reincarnation, man, and that's just how it is. That's why Esau dealt with super black women, but his children came out just like Edomites, man, generation after generation, and they built up themselves a nation of lepers. And you still see that nation of lepers today, albeit now the Lord allows some of them to deal with women of the other nations, and they get color to fulfill the scriptures, man. But they're still not going to escape the fact they're Edomites. But that just, what the point I'm trying to show you is, you got all these Edomite looking motherfuckers today. How is it that that took place in a planet full of dark-skinned people? It's because that curse was upon them. All right. Now what you should see is a map and basically it's detailing levels of pigment, which the map didn't really turn out too well when I copied it, but I'm gonna show you the lightest fragment you see there is the rating from 1 to 12. And where is that located? Where in Europe, where these so-called white people live, where Edom has their mainstay today. Over there in Americas, in general, you got more darker people over there, so that's why it's skewing the data. But you see here in Europe, which is predominantly so-called white people, you see they got a rating of 1 to 12. Okay, look at the rest of the planet Earth. They're all people of color, people of pigment, and I'm gonna prove it. Okay, now here you got what's called the Fitzpatrick scale. Now remember I told you that the lightest image you saw in the prior chart was from 1 to 12. Now I'm going to show you so-called white people are cursed, and it's leprosy. Okay, and it's a curse which is predominantly laid upon Edom. Now, can other people get leprosy too? Yeah, but that curse of leprosy was placed upon the nation. Father had leprosy, and he passed it on to his children as a curse. Now it says from 1 to 5, light, pale, white, often, sunburning often. So they get sunburned often, tanning behavior occasionally. So they might occasionally get a little tan. All right? And that's anyone on a 1 to 5 on the chromatic scale. Now, number 2 says white, fair, which that's bullshit. The word fair means good. To be fair is not to be leprous, okay? To be fair is to be dark. That's how it was in the ancient world before white supremacy. So when you hear about a fair person means someone that's good looking. Okay? Good looking meaning dark, not like cornmeal. Okay? White, fair, which them so-called white people know that. That's why they're all into the bronzer. They want to get tanned up as much as possible, because they know that it don't look good to look like cornmeal. That's not the height of beauty. Now it says white, fair, sunburning, usually, tanning behavior sometimes, and that's from 6 to 10. See, that's from 6 to 10. So you saw that on the prior chart that the Europeans, so-called Europeans, they're predominantly in that zone, that leprous, allergic to sunlight zone. Now the rest of the planet Earth, which predominantly who lives on the other parts of the earth, other nations, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Hamites, okay, all right, Ishmael, okay, what does it say? Medium white to light brown, sunburn rarely white because they're brown people, they have brown pigment, tannin usually, and that's from 11 to 15. Then you got olive, moderate brown, rarely, often. So from that onwards, they rarely ever get sunburn because they're natural people. All the peoples on the earth, the nations of the earth, the Lord gave them pigment. But there's one group of people on the earth that have a significant lack of pigment, and that's the Edomites. All right? So that's a big clue as to who the Edomites are today, the way they look, because they bear the curse of their father Esau, which is really Cain. They bear that curse upon them. So generally, predominantly, you see someone that look like a so-called white man, they're an Edomite, and that's why we use that term. That's why we identify them as that. Now, are there, because of miscegenation and pursuing to Matthew the 13th chapter, you got the wheat and the tares. So you might have it where through mixing, you got so-called white people today in this day and age that, or Edomites, that might look like other nations, but they're really Edomites. But that's the exception to the rule. Just like you might have a so-called white person who looks like an Edomite, but really his lineage goes back to another nation. His lineage can go back to Israel. So that's why it's not completely all about what you look like. But again, the archetype is still there. And it's a generalization which is still good and useful. Because at the end of the day, Edom as a people are so-called white people. And you got certain anomalies that don't look like so, that don't fit the pattern. So this is for, you're going to have people out there that look like Edomites, they fit the archetype of an Edomite, but their lineage don't go back to Esau, and we appreciate that. And we also appreciate that you're going to have so-called Negroes out there who fit the archetype of a Judite, but really they're an Edomite, they're a Tear. But at the end of the day, into the next video I'm going to show you is no one is going to escape their judgment. No one, no Edomite, just because they might have escaped that leprosy, doesn't mean they're going to escape the curse of the judgment that's coming to them. And just like you're going to have Israelites that might have leprosy, that doesn't mean that they are not entitled to the promises which were given unto their seed. Because at the end of the day, what it really comes back to is your lineage and your seed. And with that, I'm going to say shalom.